Look, we need to talk about what's really happening in Cleveland right now, because this situation with Shedeur Sanders has reached a boiling point that nobody saw coming this fast. The Browns are in complete chaos mode, and every single day that passes without a quarterback change feels like the organization is actively choosing dysfunction over progress. This isn't speculation anymore. This is a full-blown crisis that's threatening to tear apart whatever credibility the franchise has left with its fan base. The London game against the Vikings wasn't just a loss, it was a complete exposure of everything broken about this offense. Dillon Gabriel looked completely overwhelmed on that international stage, and the entire world got to watch Cleveland's offensive incompetence in real time. But here's what makes this so much worse than just another bad game. The Browns knew going into that matchup that they were struggling offensively. They knew the questions were mounting. They knew Shedeur Sanders was sitting on that bench radiating readiness. And they still rolled out the same tired formula that's been failing them all season long. That's not loyalty, that's stubbornness bordering on organizational malpractice. What's driving everyone absolutely insane is how obvious the solution appears to be. You've got a young quarterback who's been nothing but professional, who's apparently killing it in practice, who carries himself with the kind of poise that veteran players notice and respect. And yet the coaching staff is treating this decision like it's some impossible riddle when literally everyone else in the building and outside of it can see exactly what needs to happen. The disconnect between what the Browns are doing and what everyone knows they should be doing has become this massive chasm that's swallowing up any remaining goodwill. Deion Sanders didn't help calm things down, but honestly, why should he? When your son is clearly ready for an opportunity and the team keeps trotting out mediocrity week after week, of course you're going to speak up. And the way Deion said it, that confidence in his voice when he declared Shedeur will get his shot this season, that wasn't a father being hopeful. That was someone who knows the game inside and out, stating what he sees as inevitable. The problem for the Browns is that statement turned up the pressure from a simmer to an absolute roar. Now, every snap Gabriel takes feels like borrowed time. Every incomplete pass, every 3 and out, every stalled drive just reinforces what Deion said and makes the Browns look increasingly foolish for not making the move everyone can see coming. The fan reaction has been volcanic. Browns fans have dealt with decades of disappointment, but this feels different because the frustration isn't about lacking talent or resources. It's about watching the team actively refuse to use what they have. Social media is absolutely flooded with demands for Shedeur. The chants in the stadium aren't dying down, they're getting louder. Fan podcasts and message boards have essentially united around one single message, and that message is screaming for change. When was the last time a Browns fan base was this unified about anything? That alone should tell you something significant is happening here. But let's dig into what's reportedly happening inside that locker room, because this is where things get really troubling for Kevin Stefanski. Multiple reports are suggesting that veteran players are privately questioning the offensive game plan. There's apparently growing frustration with the lack of adjustments, the predictable play calling, and most damaging of all, the refusal to give Shedeur an opportunity when everyone can see Gabriel isn't getting it done. NFL veterans aren't stupid. They know their window for success is limited. They know when a season is slipping away, and when they see what they believe is a clear solution sitting unused on the bench, that breeds resentment. Not toward Shedeur, but toward the coaching staff for what feels like stubbornness disguised as process. This is how you lose a locker room in the NFL. Not through some dramatic blow-up or public confrontation, but through the slow poisoning of trust. When players stop believing that coaches are making decisions in the best interest of winning, when they start feeling like they're being asked to execute a failing plan just so leadership doesn't have to admit they were wrong, that's when everything starts crumbling, and all the signs suggest Cleveland is dangerously close to that point. The body language on the sidelines tells a story. The post-game comments from players are becoming more carefully worded, more diplomatic, which usually means they're biting their tongues. The energy around the team just feels heavy, like everyone's waiting for something to break. Kevin Stefanski is in an impossible position, and you almost have to feel for him. almost. He's built his entire offensive philosophy around certain principles, and admitting those principles aren't working with the current personnel would be a massive blow to his ego and his reputation. But here's the brutal truth about coaching in the NFL. Your job isn't to prove your system works. Your job is to win football games. And if your system isn't producing wins, you adapt or you get replaced. There's no third option. The league has zero patience for stubbornness masquerading as conviction. Stefanski has to know this. He's been around long enough to understand how quickly things can turn. So why is he digging in his heels? Maybe he genuinely believes Dillon Gabriel gives them the best chance to win right now. Maybe he's worried about the message it sends to the locker room if he caves to external pressure. Maybe he's concerned about throwing a young quarterback into a difficult situation and potentially damaging his development. These are all legitimate coaching considerations, but at some point you have to weigh those concerns against what's actually happening on the field and in the building. And what's happening is dysfunction. The offense is stagnant, the fans are revolting, the locker room is reportedly fracturing, and every week you delay making a change, you're gambling with your own job security and the season's viability. Let's talk about Shedeur Sanders himself, because his behavior throughout this entire circus has been remarkable. In an era where young athletes are constantly in the spotlight, where every emotion gets broadcast on social media, where drama is almost expected, Shedeur has been the picture of composure. He's not posting cryptic messages. He's not liking tweets calling for him to start. He's not giving inflammatory interviews. He's just showing up, working hard, staying ready, and conducting himself like a professional. That kind of maturity is rare, especially for someone who hasn't even gotten his opportunity yet. Most young quarterbacks in this situation would be chomping at the bit, showing frustration, making their feelings known. But Shedeur seems content to let his preparation speak for itself. And that patience, that professionalism, it's making the Browns look even worse for not giving him a shot, because if he was out there causing problems, complaining, being a distraction, it would be easy to justify keeping him on the bench. But he's doing everything right. He's making it impossible to criticize his readiness from a maturity standpoint. The only argument left is talent and preparation, and by all accounts from people who watch practice, he's checking those boxes too. So what's the actual reason for the delay? Because from the outside, it's starting to look like pure stubbornness, like organizational paralysis, like a coaching staff that's more afraid of being wrong than committed to being successful. The offensive struggles in London weren't just about one bad game. They were the culmination of weeks of mediocre quarterback play, uninspired play calling, and an overall lack of rhythm and identity. Gabriel has had chances. He's had multiple opportunities to prove he can run this offense effectively. And while he hasn't been terrible, he also hasn't given anyone confidence that he's the answer. In the NFL, that's often all it takes. If you're not actively winning people over, if you're just treading water, the calls for change are going to get louder and louder until they become impossible to ignore. That's exactly where Cleveland is right now. Gabriel isn't losing games single-handedly, but he's also not doing anything to quiet the storm. And in this environment, maintaining the status quo feels like choosing to sink slowly instead of trying to swim. What makes this whole situation so maddening for Browns fans is that they've been down this road before. How many times have they watched this organization stick with the wrong plan for too long? How many seasons have been wasted because decision makers were too proud or too scared to make necessary changes? This franchise has become almost legendary for its inability to figure out the quarterback position. And now, when they potentially have someone interesting on the roster, someone who could inject energy and hope into a dying season, they're hesitating. It's the same old pattern, the same organizational paralysis that's defined this franchise for decades, and fans are beyond tired of it. The media coverage has reached a fever pitch. Every Browns-related segment on Sports Talk shows inevitably circles back to Shedeur. Analysts are openly questioning Stefanski's decision-making. Insiders are reporting that the situation is becoming untenable. National reporters who usually don't pay much attention to Cleveland are suddenly writing features about the quarterback controversy. This isn't just local noise anymore. This is a national story about organizational dysfunction and the mishandling of what should be a relatively straightforward decision. And every day that passes without resolution, the Browns look worse. They look indecisive. They look scared. They look like a franchise that's learned nothing from years of failures. Here's what's particularly interesting about the timing of all this. The Browns aren't mathematically eliminated from playoff contention yet. The season isn't over. There's still theoretically time to salvage something meaningful from these remaining games. But that window is closing rapidly. Every loss makes the mountain harder to climb. Every week of offensive stagnation makes it less likely they can suddenly flip a switch and start winning. So if there was ever a time to make a bold move to inject some life into this team, it's right now. Waiting until the season is completely lost to give Shedeur his opportunity would be the worst possible approach, because then it just looks like you're giving up. Like you're throwing a kid into garbage time to see what happens. But if you make the move now, while there's still something to play for, it sends a completely different message. It says we're fighting. It says we believe in this player. It says we're willing to take a calculated risk to try and save this season. The comparison to other teams who've made midseason quarterback changes is inevitable. Some of those moves have worked brilliantly, others have backfired spectacularly, but almost universally, the teams that have made those changes have said afterward that they wish they'd done it sooner. There's almost never a case where a coaching staff looks back and says, "We're really glad we waited as long as we did." Usually the regret is about lost time, about games that slipped away while they stuck with the wrong plan. Cleveland is dangerously close to falling into that same trap. They're watching opportunities evaporate while clinging to a formula that clearly isn't working. The pressure on Stefanski isn't just coming from fans and media, it's reportedly coming from inside the building too. When assistant coaches start privately questioning the offensive direction, that's a massive red flag. These are people who are invested in the team's success, who understand the intricacies of the game plan, who work with these players every single day. If they're expressing doubt, that carries serious weight. It means the problems aren't just perceived from the outside. They're being felt internally by people who know exactly what's happening behind closed doors. And if Stefanski has lost the confidence of his own staff, even partially, that's a crisis of leadership that goes beyond just quarterback decisions. Let's be clear about what Shedeur Sanders represents at this point. He's become more than just a backup quarterback waiting for his chance. He's become a symbol of hope, of change, of the possibility that this season doesn't have to be a complete waste. Fans are projecting all their frustrations and all their desires for something different onto him. That's not entirely fair to Shedeur, because he's just a young player who hasn't proven anything yet at this level, but that's how desperate the situation has become. When your starting quarterback is uninspiring and your season is circling the drain, people will latch onto anything that feels like a potential solution, and right now, Shedeur is that solution in the minds of almost everyone watching this team. The organizational philosophy that's being revealed through this controversy is deeply concerning. Great teams adapt. Great organizations recognize when something isn't working and have the courage to try something different. The Patriots under Belichick were famous for making ruthless decisions that prioritized winning over sentiment. The 49ers have shown willingness to pivot at quarterback when they felt it gave them a better chance. Successful franchises don't get attached to plans that aren't producing results. They stay flexible, they stay aggressive, and they stay focused on the ultimate goal of winning. Cleveland, by contrast, is showing all the hallmarks of an organization that's more worried about being wrong than being successful. That's a culture problem, not just a coaching problem, and it's the kind of culture that leads to decades of mediocrity. The financial investment in this roster makes the current situation even more frustrating. The Browns have spent significant resources building what should be a competitive team. They've invested in offensive weapons, in the defense, in surrounding their quarterback with talent. And now they're watching that investment produce minimal returns because the most important position on the field isn't functioning. That's organizational malpractice of the highest order. When you've built a roster designed to win now, you can't afford to waste seasons on quarterback indecision. You have to be aggressive. You have to be willing to make moves that might feel uncomfortable if you believe they'll improve your chances of success. Playing it safe, sticking with mediocrity, that's actually the riskiest strategy of all because you're guaranteeing stagnation. What happens if the Browns continue to delay and the season completely falls apart? What happens if they finish with a losing record, miss the playoffs again, and then finally give Shedeur his chance in meaningless late season games? The fallout would be enormous. Fans would be furious. The locker room would be demoralized. Stefanski's job security would be seriously threatened. And worst of all, you'd have wasted an entire year of development for your potentially franchise quarterback. Because even if Shedeur struggles initially, there's value in getting him reps, in letting him learn through real game experience, in building chemistry with the receivers, and figuring out what he needs to work on. Waiting until the season is already lost to start that process is just compounding the mistake. The mental toll this is taking on everyone involved can't be understated. Dillon Gabriel knows everyone wants him replaced. That's gotta be affecting his confidence, his preparation, his performance. How do you go into games knowing the entire stadium is chanting for your backup? How do you lead a huddle when half the locker room is reportedly questioning why you're the guy out there? That's an impossible situation, and it's one that the coaching staff created by not handling this more decisively. If you're truly committed to Gabriel, you protect him by shutting down the speculation and backing him publicly and privately. If you're not committed, you make the change and let him move on with dignity. Stringing this out, letting it fester, that's cruel to the player and destructive to the team. Shedeur's family background can't be ignored in this discussion. Growing up as Shedeur Sanders' son, he's been around elite football his entire life. He understands pressure, he understands expectations, he understands the media circus and the constant scrutiny. Those aren't things he'll have to adjust to. He's been living them since childhood. That's a massive advantage that most rookie quarterbacks don't have. The transition to NFL life, the handling of media obligations, the mental side of playing under intense pressure. These are areas where Shedeur is probably more prepared than 90% of young quarterbacks entering the league. So the argument that he needs more time to develop those skills doesn't really hold water. He's been developing them his entire life. The comparison to other young quarterbacks who got early opportunities is instructive. CJ Stroud started immediately and looked fantastic. Bryce Young struggled but gained valuable experience. Anthony Richardson showed flashes despite inconsistency. The common thread is that teams gave them opportunities to play and develop. Even when the results weren't perfect, there was progress happening. Lessons being learned, chemistry being built. Cleveland risks falling behind in their quarterback's development by keeping him stapled to the bench while the season burns. If Shedeur is truly the future, and there's every indication he might be, then every game he doesn't play is a missed opportunity for growth. That's time you never get back. Experience you can't manufacture in practice. The strategic timing of when to make this change is crucial. If Cleveland waits too long, they risk the narrative shifting from bold move to desperate panic. There's a big difference between benching your starter because you believe the backup gives you a better chance to win versus benching your starter because the season is already lost and you might as well see what you have. One suggests confidence and forward thinking. The other suggests defeat and resignation. The Browns are running out of time to make this look like the former rather than the latter. Every week that passes makes it harder to frame this as anything other than an admission that they should have made the change weeks ago. The loyalty question is interesting because Stefanski is clearly a coach who values stability and process. Those aren't bad qualities. In many situations, they're exactly what you want in a head coach. But loyalty has to be earned and maintained through performance. When performance drops, when results aren't there, loyalty can't be the only consideration. At some point, loyalty to a struggling player becomes disloyalty to the other 52 guys on the roster who are fighting every week and deserve the best possible chance to win. It becomes disloyalty to the fan base that's invested emotionally and financially in this team. Leadership isn't about being loyal to a plan or a person no matter what. It's about making the best decision for the organization's success, even when that decision is uncomfortable. The precedent being set here matters too. If the Browns ultimately make this change, how will they explain the delay? What message does it send to have waited so long? Future players and coaches will remember how this was handled. They'll remember whether the organization was willing to adapt or whether they stubbornly clung to a failing plan. Organizational culture gets built through these moments. The decisions you make under pressure reveal what you truly value. Right now, Cleveland is revealing that they value process over results, stability over adaptation, the comfort of the known over the potential of the unknown. That's a recipe for continued mediocrity. Subscribe if you want to see how this plays out, because one way or another, resolution is coming. The pressure has become too intense to maintain this holding pattern much longer. Either Stefanski will make the change and we'll see what Shedeur Sanders can do, or he'll keep Gabriel in and risk watching his season and possibly his job completely implode. There's no middle ground anymore. The time for careful consideration and patient evaluation has passed. Now it's about action, about leadership, about whether this organization has learned anything from its decades of dysfunction. Fans deserve an answer, the players deserve clarity, and Shedeur Sanders deserves his opportunity to prove whether all this noise and all this anticipation was justified. Whatever happens next, this story is far from over, and the consequences of how it unfolds will echo through Cleveland for years to come.